everyone. Let me ask you a few questions. Have you ever heard the phrase, shine your light, and you have absolutely no idea what that means? Or have you heard the phrase, shine your light, and you know what it means, but you don't know how to actually do it? Or perhaps you know what it means, and you've been given suggestions about how to shine your light, but you live with a disability, and all the suggestions you've heard are accessible to you. Well, you're in the perfect place. My name is Allison Thompkins, and I study spirituality for 20 years, and my entire adult life I've learned how to modify various spiritual practices to meet my abilities. You see, I was born with the physical disability, cerebral palsy, but I still let it stop me from experiencing spiritual practices. A few years ago, friends of mine with disabilities saw the great experience and the success I was having doing my modified version of spiritual practices, and asked me if I could help them develop practices that were accessible to them. And before I knew it, I became the go-to person for inclusive spiritual practices. Now, back to shining your light. Before I tell you exactly what shining your light is or why it's so important, let me tell you a story from my life. Growing up, I loved summer camp. I went to camp every summer from the time I was 7 years old. To me, summer vacation didn't start until I was on a bus to some remote part of the U.S. where only mosquitoes and caterpillars lived. I loved camp. This summer I was 14 years old. I was just hanging out, doing my thing, and one of my favorite counselors came up to me and said, "So, Allison, are you going to apply to be a counselor next summer?" I had to admit, I was pretty surprised. While this camp did have other counselors with disabilities, none of them needed quite as much help as I did to get ready in the morning and at night. And so I shared this concern with her. She said, "Don't worry. If you need help, we will help you with whatever you need." The kids who are younger to you already look up to you. Do not let the fact that you need help stop you from becoming a camp counselor. I said, "Okay." Now, that was what I was willing to share with her. What I wasn't willing to share yet was I wondered, would the kids have fun with me? Being a camp counselor is about giving piggyback rides, picking up kids and turning them upside down, pushing them on the strings. It's about doing so many things that my muscles simply don't do. And I wondered, would the kids have any fun if I were their counselor? I wasn't comfortable sharing that with her until the following year I didn't apply to be a counselor. But the year after, I had a long talk with myself. And I said, you know what? Sure, I still can't give a piggyback ride, and I still can't really push a child on the swing, but I can play cards, and I can listen to stories, and not to brag on myself, but I am a bona fide master hugger. I knew I could hug kids like nobody's business. So I got up the courage, applied to be a counselor, and I was hired. And so a week. So I was up at camp doing my thing, playing goldfish like crazy, listening to stories, and just having fun with my campers. Well, about a week into camp, I was driving my motorized wheelchair up to the main office. It was rest hour for the kids, and as the name implies, the campers were supposed to be resting for an hour. So that meant I had some time to take care of personal business. So I was driving my chair up to the main office when to my left I heard a counselor screaming, "Cameron, come here! Cameron, come here!" Of course, all the kids were supposed to be asleep. So I drove my chair up to peek around the corner to see what was going on. Sure enough, a little 7-year-old camper named Cameron was running at top speed away from his counselor. You see, Cameron had cerebral palsy, just like me, but his was different. He could walk very well. He could run even better, but his speech was very, very hard to understand. In fact, I was one of the few counselors at camp who could usually understand what he said. So I'm looking at the scene at Cameron running, and then that exasperated counselor running after him. Well, he stopped at the top of the walkway and looked and saw me looking at him, and he came running down the walkway in front of me to my right side, lifted my arms, climbed up to my lap, and put his little head on my shoulder. It was only when he was about right here that I saw huge crocodile tears streaming down his face. Well, when I had those facing safe on my lap, I looked at the counselor and said, "What's going on?" I whispered, because he didn't need to hear that conversation. So I said, what happened?" The counselor whispered back, "He's been trying to tell us something for a good 20 minutes, but we can't figure out what he's saying." I said, "I got this. I remember these days from when I was 7 years old." So I turned back to little Cameron, who has stopped crying by now, but without nothing next to my shoulder. And I asked a pretty obvious question: "Are you having a tough day?" Cameron, her little head nodded yes. "Are you trying to tell people something and they just don't get what you're saying?" His little head nodded yes a bit more vigorously. I said, "Boy, I remember those days." Cameron sat up like he had heard a firework go off. He looked me in the eye and said, "You? But everyone knows what you say." I said, "Well, yeah, now they do. But when I was your age, no one, and I mean no one, understood me as well as they do now. Even my family and my best friends struggle to understand me sometimes." He looked at me a bit incredulously, like, "I don't know if I believe that one woman." And then he said, "Well, what happened?" And I said, "Do you mean why can people understand me now?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "You know the answer to that," with a huge smile. And he looked a bit befuddled. And then I thought I might go off speech therapy. He said, I said, "That's right, speech therapy. I went to speech therapy 3 days a week for an hour every single time. I felt like I lived in speech therapy." Cameron cried out laughing. I said, "Do you go to speech therapy?" He said, "Yeah, but it's kind of boring." I said, "It can be that way sometimes, but a few years after I was 7, I only went 2 days a week. And then a few years later, I went once a week. And now I don't go at all." He looked at me and he laid his little head on my shoulder. And then we just sat quietly for a moment. Then all of a sudden, he sat up, lifted the armrest of my chair, hopped off the lap, and turned around and gave me the look. The look that meant, "Allison, can I honk your wheelchair horn?" You see, my wheelchair had a horn on it, and all the kids loved to honk it. So I looked at him and said, "Cameron, do you want to honk my horn?" Giggles escaped from his little body, and he said, "Yes." And I said, "Okay, Cameron, honk my horn." So he pushed on it with all of his might, and giggles erupted from him and from me. And after he was done honking my horn, he ran back to his counselor, who stood up and took his hand, and they walked back to the cabin. Now, had you told me when I was 7 years old that the struggle I had being understood would help another 7-year-old, I was bad. You were outside your mind. But when we share our light, when we share a story from our lives that helps another person navigate their lives, we shine our light, and we can't help but to be a blessing, not only to that person, but to the entire world. For we are allowing the light of God to shine through us to the whole world. So you may be wondering, well, how can I shine my light? It doesn't need to be a grand gesture. It can be paying a compliment to someone. It can be smiling at someone. If you're nonverbal, it can be thinking a thought of love, a blessing. There are so many ways to shine your light. And if you're interested and learning more ways to shine your light that are custom designed for the disability community. Check out my website, AllisonThompkins.com. I give loads of examples of how to shine your light. But if you're deaf or hard of hearing, if you can't leave your home, there's a way for everyone to shine their light. And I thank you for stopping by my video. I love sharing accessible spiritual practices, and you allow me to do what I love. So thank you. Until next time, everyone, peace, blessings, and purple.